Good afternoon. I want to welcome the board to the Board of Directors agenda meeting for today, January the 15th, 2019. This is our opportunity to review the agenda for our formal board meeting that will be held on January the 22nd, 2019. Before we begin the process of reviewing this agenda, we have an update from the Aging Task Force. Mrs. Fennell.
Mayor, directors, lovely to see you here this afternoon. We have a big report from our task force on aging, and I just want to fill you in on some of the past history and how things came about. On July 31st, 2017, hundreds of seniors' lives were impacted when the CareLink Center closed on 12th Street. The pool isn't open and the land classes are beginning to be phased out. And since early June of 2018, when CareLink members first learned the facility was closing due to a loss of funding, they had been working with the City of Little Rock and CareLink to try to find a way to keep our city's only designated senior fitness center open. But talks failed and people lost hope. The center was unique in Little Rock, and because it was dedicated to senior fitness and camaraderie. And what I loved about it is I met a lot of women there, friends. They became friends who were retired African-American women, and we had a lot of teachers and nurses, healthcare workers, cashiers, people who'd worked hard their whole lives and had wanted to spend the last quarter of it protecting their health and working out at the fitness center. We had a lot of Chinese Americans and Hispanics and also white men and white women. And people were very friendly there and got along well and were fond of each other. We often talked about how lucky we were to have that facility, especially the pool, which was the best in town, a lot of people thought. And then it was gone. So people were upset, and we came down to the city board, naturally, which is what people do when they're upset. And so Mayor Stodola appointed a task force on aging to look at the current and future needs of older people in the city of Little Rock, and we held our first meeting on August 6, 2018. The task force was asked to ascertain the current level of services provided to older people, and older people is defined as 55 plus, and other significant service providers such as UAMS, CareLink, and churches. They were asked to ascertain the current infrastructure for accessing services for senior wellness, housing stabilization, medication, hunger, transportation, and other needs, to compile and study the demographics of older people in Little Rock, and to identify a level of service for older people in the city that Little Rock should aspire to. And then we were asked to make specific recommendations to the mayor and city directors by early December. That's lengthened into January, and so here we are with a new mayor, Mayor Scott, and we're reporting on what we have done, and we have, in fact, completed our work as a task force, I think. Let me tell you who was on it. Myself, I'm Ellen Fennell. I'm from Ward 1. Susan Haygood from Ward 3. And if you guys are here, will you please stand up, anybody that's here? Beth Foti, Ward 4. Jerry Damerow, Ward 5. Debbie Pyle. Mushira Tharp, Ward 7. Diane Curry. Cindy Gunter. Lynn Walls. And Dr. J.J. Lacey, who's my co-chair. I know Dr. Lacey's here. Mr. Jerry Damerow is a past CareLink board chairman. I'd like to also introduce our intern who we just talked to last week. His name is Madhav Shroff. He's from the Clinton School, and he's also in law school, so he's going to be helping us out with all the work that we have ahead of us. Directors Wright and Wyrick and Peck staffed the task force initially, and Kathy Webb has also advised us. Thank you, Kathy. So we had a large number of CareLink Fitness Center members and citizens who attended our task force meetings regularly and kept in touch with a larger group of concerned CareLink members. I'm not sure if any of them are here tonight. Anybody here? I don't think they're here. We also invited some liaisons, resource liaisons, to attend and contribute on a regular basis. And Lou Tabayan, Associate State Director for Outreach and Education with AARP. He's here tonight. Thank you, Lou. Laura Gocio with UAMS. She's Executive Assistant to the Execution Director of the Institute on Aging. And Luke Mattingly, CEO of CareLink. I don't think Luke is here. So we worked with the city staff quite a bit, and we had presentations to the task force over the first 2 months from City Manager Moore and John Eckert, Director of Parks and Recreation. We had presentations from Luke Mattingly, the CEO of CareLink, and from Lou Tabayan, who reported to us on the AARP Age-Friendly Community Network, and Laura Gocio with UAMS, who provided information on UAMS's services, especially through the Don Reynolds Center on Aging. Our task force members at first researched fitness centers across the state, but primarily in Central Arkansas, and reported back on the physical facility programs offered, funding sources, the original cost of facility usage and membership fees, and how they were supported financially. And the covers from each of those reports are at the back of this report in your packet. So, as you can imagine, it became apparent early on that the task outline was too vast for the group to handle in a short 4 months. And we even began meeting, first we were meeting twice a month, then we split into 2 subcommittees, long-term subcommittee and a short-term subcommittee, and Director Wyrick headed the short-term subcommittee. But we knew that it was just too much, and so we began thinking about a commission because we saw that the need was great, and the city had really not looked at the needs of seniors heretofore. One of our primary recommendations is for the city to officially join the AARP network of age-friendly communities to begin implementing the AARP program through a new Commission for Age-Friendly Little Rock. So one of the things we're going to ask for you to do today is to commit to putting into motion a new commission for age-friendly Little Rock. I'll tell you about the AARP network of age-friendly communities for a little bit. It's an institutional affiliate of the World Health Organization's global network, and AARP's participation in the age-friendly network advances efforts to help people live easily and comfortably in their own homes and communities as they age. Older adults are encouraged to take an active role in their community's plans to ensure that their voices are heard. And AARP facilitates the community's enrollment and guides it through the implementation and assessment process. This program is a multi-year program, and the initiatives focus on such areas as housing, caregiving for seniors, community engagement, volunteering, social inclusion, and combating isolation among older people. The program emphasizes the built and the social environment, and AARP facilitates the community's enrollment and guides its representatives through the program's implementation and assessment process. We really felt like the only way we could get a handle on the questions that we had asked at the beginning of the formation of the task force was well, we felt like this would be a really good way to get a handle on those issues, the AARP network program. And Kathy went to the convention, when was that, November, of Network for Friendly Communities, so I'm sure she'll be happy to say more about that later. So I'm going to ask Debbie to come up here and go through the population slides and demographic information that we have.
So 3 intro comments before I talk about the demographics. One is that our task force understands data is hugely important. Huh? Can you hear me now? I'm an old teacher, so normally you can hear me no matter what. How important data is. And we know there's lots more to gather and lots more to analyze. The second thing I want you to consider as we go through these, in order to pull the data we wanted, we had to pull it from different sources. We couldn't go to one source to get the data. So we have 3 sources: the 2010 census, the 2016 American Community Survey, and then Metro Plan. So know that from one slide to the next, you can't reconcile the numbers. I immediately started trying to add and say, this should equal this. It's not going to. And then the third thing I would say is Melissa is our data guru, and Melissa is not able to be here today. If you have questions, we'll compile those and get those back to Melissa and then talk through those. Okay. First slide, we thought let's look at Little Rock. So if you look at the 2016 American Community Survey, they estimated Little Rock's population at 197,640, and almost a quarter of our population is 55 plus, 23% to be exact, 47,376. Okay? So that was that's current. What's it look like in the future? And they're estimating a 20% growth year over year. So by 2020, 150,000 individuals will be 55 plus, and by 2025, 300,000. Okay? So then we said, okay, well, what do they look like in terms of their housing? And I won't read to you. You can look at the screen and in your presentation. But do they live alone? Do they live with a spouse? Do they live with a caregiver? And we just thought that was interesting information to access and review. So you can see, based on our, and then this is another case of now it's 65 plus. Do they live alone, relatives, etc. Okay? And then we said, okay, so we have a lump sum, but what do they look in terms of if we were going to segment the age, 55 to 64, 25,000, 65 to 74, 11,000, etc., 7,000, and 85 plus, 3,900. And you would expect the largest number of our population would be 55 to 74. Okay? We also wanted to look at the poverty level. You know, how do they live in terms of their economic status? And you'll see that almost 7% are at the poverty level of our 55 plus population. Okay? We wanted to look at the race and ethnic background. And again, I will not read to you, but you can see this info. Okay? And then we thought, okay, we looked at the city as a whole. Now let's look at the ward data. And we wanted to look at by male and female. So first of all, you'll see the females, and you'll see Ward 4 is your largest population, followed by Ward 3, though most of the wards are pretty close. There's not a huge discrepancy. So this is females 55 plus, and then males 55 plus. And then the last slide that we want to provide is, so here's Little Rock. How does it look across the nation? And in fact, we're 23% 55 plus. Across the nation, it's 21%. Okay, thanks.
Does anybody have any questions about those for Debbie? So we're looking at a slide called Key
Sorry,
Assumptions.
we have one question from Director Webb.
Thank you, Mayor Scott. And this may not be a question that we can get today, but because Arkansas is in the top 10 in seniors who suffer from food insecurity, to see that we have a 7%, that 7% is really surprising, and I wonder if we know which of those three places we got that statistic, and if we could get Melissa or somebody to look at that. I'm just surprised that it's that low when the hunger rate is so high among seniors.
Do you have that question, Debbie?
I don't, but I will take that back to her.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Director Richardson?
Thank you, Mayor Scott. Thank you for the presentation. Do Mayor, Bruce, or you guys, does anyone know the median age for Little Rock?
We didn't really look at that, I don't think.
Do we know that?
I'll capture that as well to find out.
All right, thank you.
I don't know it.
Of the 55 plus population.
So,
And one more, we have
Yes.
Director Wiry,
Ellen,
Vice Mayor Wiry.
where are you? There you are, you've moved.
the slide where it talks about 20% growth estimated for older adult population, I should know the answer to this. It says it's based on Metroplan numbers. Is that just City of Little Rock, or is that countywide?
It's not just City of Little Rock. It's Metroplan numbers, so that would be
County?
the area that Metroplan covers. And I don't know exactly how Melissa extrapolated that, but we had to use whatever information sources we had. So that was the best one we had for planning. They do planning estimates, so 20%.
Well, when we were looking at these, I'd asked that on the slides that we put Little Rock, and it was my understanding that the only one that was not Little Rock, maybe it was that one. Was it that one?
Well, there was the U.S. population. I think
Yeah,
that was
the
the
U.S.
one.
population. So the rest of them were supposed to be Little Rock. However, this one doesn't show Little Rock either.
Well, this is
so-
the only planning information we have,
Yeah,
so
okay.
we were kind of forced to use it.
Okay. I'm with you.
Unfortunately,
Thank
I wish
you.
we had better information.
Yeah, just wanted to clear that up. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So the key assumptions for the long term they're really the underpinning for our recommendations, which will follow. And the thing about the key assumption is we assume that these things will either happen or they will be implemented. And the ability to implement our recommendations will depend on the key assumptions being correct. And there's 6 key assumptions. And the first one relates to that important point that we just talked about, which is that the planning department assumes the population growth will continue at a rate of 20% annually. The second assumption is that demand for services for older people will increase with population growth, along with the need for increased resources, funding, volunteer support, staff, space, equipment, contract assistance. We have a need, and it's going to be growing. The task force or the commission, with the support of the new mayor and board, will seek to qualify and join the AARP network of age-friendly communities. I want to emphasize there's no cost to become a member of the network, and we will be allied with other cities that are preparing for their growth and the world's growing population of older adults and the parallel trend of urbanization. So an age-friendly Little Rock initiative working with AARP will highlight services and opportunities for older people. It will encourage community, volunteering, aging in place, and in-migration, all of which will contribute to the population and enlarge the tax base. Little Rock will create, enhance, and support outstanding amenities to draw people to live in the city, and a thriving age-friendly Little Rock program that's anchored by an age-friendly senior center is an amenity that's critical for our state's capital. We believe that effective communications and marketing in tandem with the age-friendly initiative will expand older people's knowledge of programs and facilitate their access to programs and amenities. We need better ways to communicate and market what we do have to offer and what we hope we will have to offer in the future. So next. So the long-term recommendations are based on the assumptions, and the number one recommendation is that we will work with AARP as we create a commission for an age-friendly Little Rock, and that it will be a lens for identifying and responding to older people's needs. We will seek answers from older citizens and their caretakers as to their priorities through surveys, neighborhood meetings, and other methods. This research will answer questions the task force was unable to address in the short time it operated, and this is what Madoff is going to help us with. Let's see. So I'm not going to go into all the points that are under these recommendations. You can read them, they're in your packet, but I do want to hit the high points of the most important bullets that we have. Number two, the Commission for an Age-Friendly Little Rock with support from AARP, all relevant city agencies and other groups such as CareLink, Arkansas Department of Health, UAMS, the Clinton School, etc., will follow the multi-year process as outlined in the ARP network of age-friendly communities. Phase 1 is planning, that's years 1 and 2. Phase 2 is implementation, years 3 through 5. And Phase 3 is evaluation and continual improvements, year 5 and beyond. And in your packet, you can see page 9 for more on the age-friendly community and city program. So the commission with AARP will identify the needs and desires of older people through surveys and ward meetings through the 8 domains of livability. That's housing, transportation, outdoor spaces and buildings, social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation, communication and information, community support, and health services. And 3, the City of Little Rock with the Commission for an Age-Friendly Little Rock will establish a fitness and social center dedicated to older people. When we did this research, we were kind of stunned to see all of the senior fitness facilities in central Arkansas, and really now there's nothing in Little Rock. And I know that most everybody on this board agrees that Little Rock really needs a senior center. Hope we can get that done. Shwanda? So I don't think it's fair to say we need this and we need that and not identify revenue streams. And so we tried to do that in the short time that we had, but we really believe that we need more of an investment in grants. We would like grants for an age-friendly Little Rock, and we're thinking that perhaps a private foundation might be set up for that. We'd have to research that. I don't know what the restrictions are on the city in terms of that. I know a lot of government agencies do have private foundations. And then a tax or a bond issue will be put to voters to pay for any senior facility. We believe that seniors will come out for this, will vote for this, and we all know that seniors are the people who vote in force. We believe that fee structures should be reviewed probably every 3 to 4 years with the city programming, Jim Daly Center. There's a possibility to use contractors with to get special talent in to provide programs at a senior center. So, you know, so you pay that way. You pay $25, and they're able to bring in a special instructor for either fitness or education or whatever workshop you would like to have. So we also, I'm not sure where this belongs here, but I wanted to make sure that we said it. Volunteer recognition is going to be a prominent feature of reward through the Commission for Age-Friendly Little Rock and Parks and Recreation. We feel that's important, and it doesn't happen enough. The short-term subcommittee recommendations, this was the long-term subcommittee and the short-term subcommittee went their separate ways and came back to report to each other. And Director B.J. Wyrick was on this committee and wrote these notes. They did an inventory of the program activities that were offered at the CareLink facility and compared them with what was offered at the Jim Daly Fitness and Aquatic Center, and met with the group that had left CareLink and had a lot of input from them on what kind of classes they would need. So there's some very specific recommendations relating to how Jim Daly Fitness Center operates, and I think they're good recommendations. One of them is the Daly Center will begin accepting Silver Sneakers and Silver Fit programs. I know those are both in progress at the city attorney's office. We'd like to gear more class times at the Daly Center to people that are retired, mid-morning and early afternoon classes. Some people from the CareLink Center found that the classes were not as advanced as they would like and were too easy. So we'd like to look at all the classes there and see if we've met everybody's needs and in a range of fitness ability. Handicap parking was an issue, and I was there not too long ago and noted that the complaint was the walk from the handicap parking to the front door, which one side of the parking is a little bit further away from the door than the north side. So if we could move more of the handicap to the north side of the facility, that would help. So these are kind of really specific in terms of programs that people wanted to see, so I won't go into those. But I had, because we had a long program, I had to eliminate a section that's in your, it's in your report, and it says about the AARP network of age-friendly communities. So we didn't include that in our slideshow. But there's also this brochure from AARP in your booklets. They really have great resources for us to enter into this program, and they also will probably provide technical assistance for us. So just like to thank you for your attention, and thanks to the city staff and directors for all of their great help as we move this task force forward. We had a lot of enthusiastic and helpful people working with us. And so finally, I'd just like to ask you to create a commission for an age-friendly Little Rock, and for Little Rock to join the AARP network of age-friendly communities and cities.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your attention to this very worthy cause as we continue to find more opportunities to be with our brothers and sisters that are a part of the seasoned community. And thank you to all the men and women that were a part of the task force and took time out of your schedules to help move things forward, as well as Vice Mayor Wyrick, Director Peck, and Director Wright. I know you guys took a lot of time and attention as well. I think we have a question from Director. We'd have a question now from Director Peck.
Thank you. It's not a question. I just wanted to thank Ellen, thank everybody, but with her leadership was amazing and invaluable. Dr. Lacey, everybody that participated, and just say a quick word about the AARP, Livable Cities, Age-Friendly Community. You can look at this as your bedtime reading, but it's not a daunting task to become part of this network. There's only one in the state of Arkansas. It's in Fayetteville, but they're all in surrounding states. They're 300 plus nationwide. And when I had the opportunity to go with Lou to Charlotte, there's so many best practices, so many communities that are involved in making their communities more livable. And, you know, the slogan was sort of, if it's good for an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old, it's good for an 8-year-old. It's not daunting. It doesn't cost any money. I mean, if you are 55, raise your hand, or plus. Oh, my goodness, look how many people. And we're all going to be moving in that direction, right, hopefully. So, Ellen, thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you, Cappy. Thank you for your leadership. And Director Wright?
Director
Vice
Wright.
Mayor Wyrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I am so thankful for Ellen. Usually these things rise up out of a crisis and come to everybody's attention, and that happened when the CareLink building closed, and people they were really distraught. And I appreciate you for stepping forward to take the leadership role in this and bringing this matter to some type of cohesive document that we could present to the citizens of Little Rock. Mayor Scott, I did a lot of research on this and this subject, and I've always traveled extensively over my career and over the years, and one of the things that I found that was really shocking to me was that the city of Little Rock did not have a commission that dealt with the aging population. And I did a lot of research on the internet, and every city, small, medium, and large, has one but us. And so I would like that to be a task that we undertake forthwith and get that commission established so that we can address the needs of this population. We have our commission that deals with our youth, young adults are covered under that, but we need something that is focused on this population to advise the board of directors as to policy and so forth. So I would like to have that done, and whatever steps I need to take or we need to take as a board, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Director Wright. Actually, today, it's my understanding, at least before my tenure, that some of those steps have been made due to the work that you and Vice Mayor Wyrick and Director Peck have done, along with this entire board, to make certain that we do recognize these opportunities that will benefit our elder community. And so I'm going to take a point of personal privilege, and I have a letter for you today to officially let you know that we are joining
Thank you.
the opportunity for the AARP Arkansas and the World Health Organization to become a part of the network of the age-friendly cities and communities. We are very grateful that you did take the time and to present this presentation for us today as well, and that the city board and I are looking forward to working with the new commission that will be established pretty soon.
Thank you so much. We're all grateful.
And actually, since a lot of the work was done before my tenure, I would like to ask, at a point of personal privilege, that Vice Mayor Wyrick, Directors Wright and Peck to please come down for as well. Well, I'll just speak loud. and I won't try to read the entire thing. The city of Little Rock is excited about the opportunity to join with the AARP Arkansas and the World Health Organization to become part of the network of age-friendly cities and communities. Like other forward-looking cities, Little Rock is committed to promoting policies to make our community friendly and friendly to aging populations. To address change in demographics, Little Rock has just completed the report from its task force on aging. The task force was included with members from every ward in our diverse city. 3 city directors also regularly participate, as well as representatives from the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences, AARP, and CareLink. The task force presented their recommendations to myself and the city board of directors on January 15, 2019. Our primary recommendation of the task force is to establish a commission for an age-friendly Little Rock. In the coming days, the city board will formally create this body, as well as affirm the city's commitment to being an age-friendly city. With the commission for an age-friendly Little Rock in place by early spring, Little Rock will move forward to establishing a plan of action in line with the AARP best practices for assessing needs of Little Rock's older adults. The commission. All right. You did it? You ready? You ready? All right. With the commission for an age-friendly Little Rock in place by early spring, Little Rock will move forward to establishing a plan of action in line with AARP best practices for assessing needs of the Little Rock's older adults. The Commission for an Age-Friendly Little Rock will commit to measuring activities, reviewing action plan outcomes, and reporting publicly. The City Board of Directors and I look forward to working with this new commission. And we just want to say thank you today, Ms. Fennell, and your entire commission. Thank you. We'll have an update from the city's bicycle-friendly community committee at the January 22nd meeting. Yes, Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, just real quickly, 3 points. The average age of a Little Rock citizen is 36 years old, Director Richardson, and we're actually getting a little younger, and that's good also. I also want to thank 3 key city staff members, Shawanda Robinson, Karen Johnson, and Melissa Bridges, who couldn't be here today. And then we will work with the city attorney's office to bring forward an ordinance establishing the commission in our February meeting.
Thank you so much, Mr. Manager. As stated earlier, we will have an update for the city's bicycle-friendly community committee that will be on January the 22nd board meeting. We do have an addition to our agenda, and that will be the approval of the mayoral and board of directors liaison member appointments to the City of Little Rock boards and commission. These appointments were made at the January 8th, 2019 board meeting, and the supporting resolution will be voted on January 22nd meeting. Do we have a motion? We have a motion and a second to add modification number 1. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passed. There's also been a request made by an applicant to withdraw item number 2 for the agenda. Do I have a motion for that? So moved. Second. There's a motion and a second. It has now been, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. It has now been removed. We now have a resolution Z-6034A. Madam Clerk. Oh, that's the one we removed. I'm sorry. I apologize. Now moving to our consent agenda. Are there any questions on items 1 through 11 of our consent agenda? Director White.
Mr. Moore, I'm sorry. Mr. Moore, I have a inquiry from a Mr. Lassiter about item number 4, resolution number 4. His question is, he said to please ask at the board meeting what the use of the land being donated by Miss Beverly Freeman will be. And he said he's looked at this property and it appears to be landlocked and with zero access. And he wants to know if there are plans to extend Tatum Street or 38th Street to these parcels, and if so, how much of our taxpayer money will be spent on this. Now, as is my understanding, this is in, there is access from 42nd Street into this area. There's not from Tatum Street on that side, but on the other side of the woods, there is access. So can you have staff pull that up on a map so people can see what this is? And as I understand it, I've slept since then, but as I understand it, this lady has owned this property, her family, for many, many years. Everybody is deceased, and she felt she's not coming back to Arkansas to live, and she was in ill health, and she wanted to donate it rather than let it just sit there and there'd be no family or nothing for anybody or any way to acquire this other than a long legal issue. So as I understand it, that's what the impetus was.
Correct. I believe she contacted you initially.
And I turned her over to, who was it, the housing department for a review of this situation.
Right.
And all of this is wooded and undeveloped land. So it's just, these lots were right in the middle of other lots. So if somebody else wanted to buy this and develop this, they would have to put the streets in just like anybody else. Is that correct?
Right.
So it's not so much taxpayer dollars. We rely on developers to do that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. But these are the lots, if anybody can see, and you can see all of this is undeveloped land. So it would more likely have to be purchased and developed as a parcel. But this way, she just did not want to. From what she told me, there is no family. She is the last of her line, and she just wanted to do something for the city, from what I understood.
You're correct.
Okay. Okay. So I hope that answers Mr. Lassiter's question.
Are there any more questions for items 1 through 11? Seeing none, we'll move towards the plan to develop items. Are there any questions for 12 through 14? Seeing none, we will now move on. Have any more? All right. We can now move on forward to our separate items. Item number 15 is being held separate due to the fact that it is a sole source for the annual maintenance contract for the Little Rock Police Department's WatchGuard video system. If there are no objections, item 15 will be added to the grouped items. No objections? Thank you so much. In addition, sorry about that. Director Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. Bruce, what's the rationale for sole source on this issue?
Director Richardson, this is the company that has the equipment and all of the public safety vehicles. So this is the annual maintenance contract to maintain and correct any issues with that equipment.
So essentially, it's just a contract extension.
Correct, but because it's we have to bring it back because, again, they're the only one that can maintain that equipment that's in the cars.
Is that standard practice when we have other contractors that fit this category. Rather than do a contract extension internally with legal, we'll bring it back before us for approval.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Mr. Carpenter to.
If the amount of the contract exceeds $50,000, you have to bring it back to the board for approval. Sole source agreements also have to be brought back, and I think anyway they have to be brought back at a certain amount, and that's what creates it. It's got to be impractical and unfeasible to bid. What happens is when we make certain purchases, when we choose software programs, for example, we know that we're basically choosing the same company for several years into the future just to maintain what we've purchased.
So even if the contract is, the extension is necessary for the completion of the work, that's still a standard practice?
Well, if first off, I don't know that it's really necessary to have a services contract, but I know it's really foolish not to. Sure. And so in order to have the contract in place, if you're not going to bid it, you've got to justify that it's impractical to bid. That's become quite common in the computer era.
Thank you, Tom.
Vice Mayor Wyatt.
Thank you. I'd like a report on item number 16. For one thing, the Planning Commission, we had 5 ayes, 1 nay, and 5 absent. So I'm trying to figure out why we had 5 absent on one day. But the other thing is I'd like a report on what we're doing there. The neighborhood was opposed to the subdivision going in, concerned about drainage issues, and it's my understanding that they're opposed to this as well. So can you tell me what we're doing there? And I looked in the report, I didn't see any neighborhood information in it. Did we have people that came to the Planning Commission? Maybe I just overlooked then.
Let me ask Mr. Collins, our planning director, to come forward.
And Mr. Collins, before you begin, I just want to make certain there's no objections to item 15. We'll go ahead and add that. Seeing none, it'll be added. Thank you.
Mayor, excuse me, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the board, Vice Mayor Wyrick, you are correct. There was some neighborhood opposition to that did come to that meeting. Primarily the neighborhood opposition that come to that meeting was the part of that same opposition for the neighborhood that come to the Planning Commission meeting on the approval of the plat.
Right.
Which was regarding the drainage that come through the development.
Right.
And the impact of this development on the drainage. The subdivision itself met the criteria of all of our ordinances. Therefore, there was no variances requested, so it met what we would deem would be a Richardson case from the Arkansas Supreme Court. So the plat was approved. The opposition, and there was people that did show up too. One of them spoke, one of them did not. They talked about some of the same issues, that it was abutting the neighborhood just to the north, and then also about the drainage. The opposition to the conditional use really was because they was adding some parking to it. And, and there was questions raised at that time about the drainage and what that would entail. Scott, if you'd bring up the site plan on that, you can kind of look and see. Now, the conditional use, what they're asking for is a sales office or lease office, management office, not only while they're building the subdivision, but also just continuing on, and also a community when they get it all leased out. And per our ordinances, they are allowed to do such a thing as this for a period of time to try to sell, typically for a subdivision, or for this one, since they're keeping it, to lease the buildings. But at a certain point, I think it's 3 years on there, and they can ask for another extension on that. They can use that as an office. Now the community is something that's different, that typically is brought forth at the when they do the plat, to use a lot for that, but that is not uncommon to have that request, in a subdivision. And so as far as the drainage concerned in that, staff's addressed that in the fact that if you look at there, yes, there is added parking in the front, which is, impervious material. But if you look at what a house can do, a home can also add that same amount, in the backyard, in the front yard, in the driveway. They're going to have a driveway. They could have put a patio. So if you look at the increase in drainage from what they're proposing on a conditional use for what a house would put in, that was very minor at best and insignificant. And so mainly that drainage question that was brought up was, for the drainage of the entire subdivision was that concern. Was the carryover.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the number, that's how many that we had. And
We had
since you have
five
to
people
have-
missing?
had 5 people missing, and
For
since
the
you have to
whole-
have a total of 6 to carry the approval vote, and since just 1 was in opposition, that's why it did not pass.
Okay, so was this like a holiday kind of week, or
That
why would we
was-
have 5 missing at one time? Did they all have the
That was during the
flu,
holiday
or-
time, and they was just missing. Some of them were gone traveling. Some of them, I think one of them might have been sick, but I don't know the time frame for that. But so that since we didn't carry that 6th vote, that's why it was denied. So it was denied just by the number.
Okay, that seems like an awful lot of people missing. Okay, so this is, well, we are still concerned about the drainage in that subdivision. It was my understanding that there were going to be some studies, or we were going to ask the developer to do some studies for the location, because the neighborhood has seen overflow of water across Geyer Springs into the neighborhoods to the east of where this is going in.
And that was part of the plat approval and the studies. They done a preliminary analysis of that drainage channel and submitted to staff for review prior to the final approval, and prior to receiving their permits, the grading permits, they would have had to submit a full-blown study addressing all those on there. Now, they
Have
do
they
it
done
per the
that yet?
code. I do not know if it's been submitted yet. That would be.
I know that's the other group.
I'll ask that of
Yeah.
Director of Public Works if
Yeah.
he has seen that come through. But prior to releasing of the grading permit, they would have had to have, something submitted in.
Okay, all right. Well, it's a concern for that community out there. They didn't want it in the beginning, and so here we have something else going on. But it's separate, so we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Well, in addition, we'll also have a public hearing next week on the conditional use permit with Valley Springs. But right now, I would like to bring Mr. Manager and Sarah Lillihan to come and do our 3rd quarter financial report.
Sure. Mayor and members of the board, I'm going to ask Ms. Lillihan to come forward and present the 3rd quarter financial report. Sarah.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor. If we go to the first slide, we'll see our revenues through September. As of the end of the 3rd quarter, we had achieved 79.57% of our amended budget against 75% of the amended budget for 3 quarters of the year, and that compares to 78.82% of the amended budget the prior year. When you look at the next slide, you'll see in dollars we had collected. We were approximately $9 million above the budget through the end of the 3rd quarter, and about $4 million above the same period a year ago. But the variances are due primarily to the timing that we receive our annual revenues. We had collected $157.1 million in revenues compared to $152.9 million the same period a year ago, and 3 quarters of the amended budget would have been $148.1 million. So on the next slide, you'll see the breakdown by category. So in understanding our revenue flow, our general property tax revenues, typically we receive about 40% in the 1st quarter of the year, and we receive about 60% in the 4th quarter of the year. This September revenue includes the accrual. The taxes are assessed in the previous year for collection in the current year. So this includes that large November tax deposit that we received based on the October deadline for the county. So basically, our property tax revenues are virtually complete at this point. There's some homestead and some delinquent taxes that are collected for the remainder of the year. Sales taxes are trailing 3/4 of the budget. Our fourth quarter is typically our heaviest time, and I'll be going on into that in detail when we get to the sales tax slide. Our licenses and permits are collected for the most part in the first quarter of the year. All of the business licenses are due January 1st of the year. It's our mixed drink licenses and then our planning permits and all that occur more ratably throughout the year. Intergovernmental revenues represent our state turnbacks that are received in their entirety in July. So those are complete for the year as well. So while it looks like we're $9 million ahead of budget through the end of the third quarter, this is really due to the timing of our revenues. If you look at the next slide, a few years ago, Director Campuris, or not, I guess it was last year, asked that we show also in comparison to our original adopted budget where our revenues would have been. So this is the first quarter presentation after adoption of the amendment. You'll recall that in August, we made several adjustments to reduce our revenue forecast. We reduced our property tax based on the original charge that we received in the first quarter to 1.5%. We reduced our sales tax forecast to 1.17%. It had been at just under 2.5%. And then we also had to reduce our franchise fee forecast due to the Federal Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which reduced the rate recovery requirements for the utilities. Again, the favorable variance is due to the timing of the revenues we received, but you'll see that the difference between the $6.2 million in comparison to the original budget and the $9 million on the previous slide, that is due to the revenue reductions that we had in our budget amendment. Okay.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I didn't want Mr. Blake to leave. If you look at this number, the legislature started yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Our budget was for sales tax $78 million. We have revised it down, and we're basically $3 million less than we thought we'd be. Is that correct?
We did make a reduction in our sales tax budget of, let's see, it's from 78.4 to 76.9, so it's a little over $1.5 million that we reduced that budget.
But we still have an unfavorable variance of $3 million.
And part of that too is due to the timing. Fourth quarter's usually.
But I didn't want him to leave. The legislature's going on. He's head of the Democratic caucus. This is a critical time for us. Here's $3 million that we're short that we could use for something else that we don't have, that we're going to get. If we don't get the money we deserved, we're never going to be able to do the things we want to do. That whole presentation about aging and people coming on board, we don't have enough money right now to take care of what we're doing, much less add a program. And before Mr. Blake left, I just wanted y'all to see that because he may slip out before the end of the session. I'm sorry to interrupt in the middle of your presentation.
Well, and I have had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Blakely and told him how important it is to recover some of our eroded sales tax revenue. So, mm-hmm. From the county for the property tax, it was towards the end of the month that the November, the big due date is October 15th, around there. We received that from the county towards the end of November. So we actually accrue 2 months worth of revenue. With the modified accrual, we have 60 days to collect revenue. That revenue is actually due and collectible based on the assessments of the previous year. So we go ahead and accrue that revenue. Our sales tax revenue is received 2 months behind. By state law, well, by city ordinance, we have to have, well, by state law, all municipalities have an annual year of January to December. By city ordinance, in addition, we have to adopt our annual budget by December 30th. So we are a calendar year. All municipalities have the same issue. The sales taxes are assessed at the point of sale. They are remitted to the state the following month on their sales tax return, and then the month after that is when the state distributes the funds to the local government. So there's always a 60-day time lag. It does. Yeah, I think you're.
I was just expressing that it's a challenge to have true budgeting when you have a 2-month delay.
Yes, and then due to taxpayer confidentiality, we also have limitations on what we're able to know about our revenue as well. So the next slide, we compare our revenues to the same period a year ago. So here you can see the primary favorable variance is in the area of charges for services and franchise fees. That is primarily due to the refunding of the Parks and Recreation, the 2007 capital improvement bonds, and the 2002 junior lien bonds that we did in 2017. We utilized franchise fees to refund those bonds. We were able to save the $1.3 million debt service commitment of our parks revenues that had previously been required, and we also reduced the franchise fee commitment while reducing our amortization overall by about 6 years. So that was a very big win for us, resulted in significant savings in the annual budget. Without that savings from the debt service, our charges for services are actually trailing the prior year by $478,000. And that has to do primarily with weather events, and we reflected that in our budget amendment. On the next slide is our sales tax growth. So we're talking about the third quarter, which are the receipts noted from September through November. And again, that's for the period from July through September, but it's the collection September to November. So in July, we had growth of 1.13%. In August, we had growth of 1.65%. And in September, we had growth of 1.66%. Year to date, the city sales tax portion of our sales tax revenue had increased by 0.76%. The city's share of the county 1-cent sales tax had increased 1%. The blended growth rate was 0.86%. Again, our original adopted budget was 2.1%. We did lower that with our amendment to an overall annual growth rate of 1.17%, which required 1.66% in the fourth quarter, or in the last half of the year, sorry. So during the last 12 months, our growth rate is just at 0.8%. So on the next slide, you just see the blended. That previous slide showed the individual components. This is the blended. So you'll see our growth rate. We did achieve that 1.66 that we required in both the last 2 months of the quarter, but we were trailing our overall growth requirement by about 0.14%, and that's evident on our next slide. So this shows where we are since our budget amendment. We are trailing our amended budget by $106,475, and again, that assumes that we would see that 1.66% growth rate in the last quarter of the year. On the next slide, you'll see our 1-cent sales tax. This is the tax that was passed in 2011. We began collecting in 2012. 5/8 of that is an ongoing operating tax that provides for our filling our police vacant positions, code enforcement, park staffing, those types of items. The 3/8 cent capital tax is reflected in a separate capital improvement fund. Life to date, we have accumulated $326.6 million Year-to-date, 37.2 million, of which just under 14 million is for capital projects. 23.2 million went to the general fund for operating expenses. The key here is that in the original sales tax projection, in order to fund all of the projects that were listed, we needed an average annual growth rate of 2%. You can see we've had from 0.76% to a high of 3.68% in 2015. We're currently at 0.76. So we are trailing that overall goal. We took some short-term financing notes out to accelerate our primarily public safety commitments. Those have been completed with the exception of Station 24, our fire station, which is now in progress and is fully funded as well. Some of the projects that have not been fully funded, we anticipate they may receive only about 94.6% or so of the overall funding that we had originally estimated, just based on the amount of tax that's being collected. And just as a reminder, the capital portion, the 3/8 portion of that tax expires at the end of 2021. So on the next slide, we have our electric franchise fees. These originally, our original adopted budget was 12.3 million. No, that's the reduced amount. We originally started at over 14 million based on information we had received from Entergy and rates that had already been approved by the PSC. But when the Tax Cut and Jobs Act passed, the governor asked the utilities to go back to the Public Service Commission. They no longer required, because of the tax credits, those rate recovery increases. So they reduced rates on bills and also included a credit for the previous. It was like a retroactive adjustment. So our reforecasted revenue was $12,312,000. As of the end of September, we were actually about 94.6 ahead of the amended budget due to increased usage, which you can see there. But you can also see the first quarter we were experiencing the growth they had promised of 17, 21%, 12%, and then as soon as the Tax Cut and Jobs Act hit, the adjustment, we had 2 months of 17% reductions, and then what saved us in those next 2 months were the significant increases in usage. On the next slide is the gas franchise fees. Here we had an adopted budget of $2,940,000, which represented a 4.6% increase from actual results. Results for the first half of the year were actually 30.4% above the prior year, primarily due to increased usage, and that's, again, has a lot to do with the weather. The budget amendment included an increase of about $463,000 based on what we had actually experienced through that first part of the year. CenterPoint was slower in implementing the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. They announced that just prior to the end of the third quarter. They said that the reductions in credits would begin in October, and that the average reduction in utility bills would be about 9.5%. The potential impact to our budget is about $200,000. So on the next slide, we're going to go over our expenditures, and again, this is in comparison to the amended budget. We had expended 75.02% of our budget against 3/4 of the amended budget would be right at 75%, and that compares to 73.52% same period a year ago. When you look at the next slide, you'll see the dollars. So $150,634,000 compared to a budget of $150,601,880,000 or 8,800. This is the budget for the operating expenditures. It does not include transfers out, and the transfers out amount, is below this operating line. So the difference between the revenues and the expenditures does not represent the net income. There's additional transfers in and transfers out that take place as well, and that's included in the monthly report that you receive. On the next slide, we'll see this by category. So the favorable variance in general administration of 691,000 is primarily due to the timing of some of our actuarially calculated contributions to the defined or the other post-employment benefit plan, which we've talked about. That's basically retiree benefits other than pensions, so primarily health insurance for especially our public safety folks who retire before they're eligible for Social Security insurance. The actuarially determined contributions happen in the fourth quarter. The district court variance, they had a vacant position and reduced part-time hours, which created a favorable variance. I'm explaining variances that are primarily more than 50,000 or 5%. But as you look down, our information technology has a favorable variance, and that is due primarily to the timing of their contract renewals. Through the end of September, their software and hardware maintenance contracts that renew in the fourth quarter, that was below budget by about $272,000. They had some contracted services below budget, $81,000. And then some other expenses that were below budget by $50,000, but they expected to utilize their budget by the end of the year. Our golf was over budget by $190,000, and that was due primarily to the timing of the payments to the first tee. And then there was an additional allocation to the first tee that happened in the fourth quarter as well. And that generated about $124,000 of that variance. The other expenses, the $54,000, was due to the timing of the summer part-time assistance and that type of thing, and other than the first tee that they expected to be in budget at the end of the year. Fire had a favorable or an unfavorable variance, and $1.1 million of that unfavorable variance was due to the timing of the closed pension plan contributions, which are tied to collection of the dedicated 1 mil property tax levy. So we receive all that revenue, we contribute it to the plan. So by the end of the year, that $1.1 million would balance up with the revenue. The other $600,000 was primarily due to overtime and fleet variable expenses. They had a major repair that they had to do on one of the fire apparatus that was not anticipated. In the police department, they were the reverse. They were actually $2.1 million favorable variance. On theirs, since they merged administration with Lopfe several years ago, we get billed a monthly amount for them. It's not tied to the timing of the property tax. Yet we do contribute 100% of their property tax levy to them. We make up the difference between what we're billed monthly, what we've collected, and we contribute that before the end of the year to pay down the unfunded liability. So $1.1 million of their $1.8 million of their favorable variance was due to the timing of that pension contribution, and all of their other expenses at that point in time were $275,000 below budget. Part of that was due to the timing of the second sick leave incentive payment that was due to happen and did happen the last payroll in December. And then finally, our principal and interest debt service. That is for our short-term notes. Those come due, based on the timing that the note was issued, and will be exactly in line with budget at the end of the year. The reason for the significant decrease in comparison to the same period a year ago is that one of our short-term notes we took out for the 3/8 projects has now rolled off. It's been fully paid. So now on the next slide, you'll see our the status of our vacant positions. Our amended budget, we had reduced our original vacancy requirement from $6.5 million to $6,288,000. As we have filled more and more public safety positions, that vacancy savings number has decreased. We had achieved $4.8 million through the end of September. There were 109 budgeted positions that were unfilled in the general fund at the end of the third quarter. Of that, there were only 7 police officers and 4 higher level police positions, sergeants and the like. So there were 11 vacant police positions at that time. The vacation sick payouts for retiring employees, we had $1,273,000 budgeted, and we had expended $972,000 of that budget by the end of September. The next slide just kind of shows how we've trended with our vacant positions. And I think it's very, very significant to note that we had 72 vacant police officer positions in July of 2017. By September 2018, that number was 11. Now, I heard Chief Finks say the other day that we'll be at 20, so we've probably had a few more retirements since then. We do have a recruit school going on right now, and another one planned in February. But this is a significant accomplishment to bring that down. That concludes my quarterly financial report. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Director Fortson.
Sarah, did I understand you to say that our 3% capital funds tax is 4.6% below what we had budgeted at this point?
The 3/8 cent?
Yes.
What I said is, our over the 10-year period, I anticipate that those projects that had not been fully funded by previous short-term financings where we accelerated and did them early on, we anticipate they will be between 94 and 95% funded. That assumes that we'll see 2% growth in the last couple of years. That's where we stand right now.
So, well, you answered my second question. The 4.6 is actually your estimate of at the end of the 10-year period, not our current standing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So you're saying that those capital fund projects will be basically at 94% unless you're able to fund them with short-term financing.
Well, unless we're able to fund them with other revenue sources. We did not take out any additional notes because with the 5-year required payback, we stopped that in 2016. The last payment would be 2021 when the tax expires unless it is renewed. If it were to be renewed, we could potentially take out a note and accelerate completion of some of those projects at that time.
You may not be able to answer this without doing a little research, but are there any capital fund projects that were back in the wish list and approved when we started this in 2012 that have been started and maybe partially funded that are, I guess, out on a limb, not knowing if we're going to have enough money to get to the end of that rope?
No. From my understanding, the only thing that may not be completed for the most part would be potentially the courts portion of the headquarters. Is that?
That's correct. And we've talked about this often over the years as we've tried to watch the collections as they come in. So the only project on the list that the board at that point in 2011 approved the resolution would be the courts building. We're moving forward with the police headquarters. And one thing, Director Fortson, that as we talk about that 94 or 95%, we also have to remember that we had set aside about $10 million for the police and courts building with the recommendation that the board approved to redo the McFadden building. I'm really hoping, even though it's an old building, that we're going to see some savings from that line item that could go toward some of the other projects that we might be at the 95%. So that's
right.
We're going to come back probably next month, I hope, with going forward with hiring an architect and contractor on the McFadden building. So we'll know more in 2019.
Well, that's good news, though, that there's a way maybe to make it all come together toward the end. It might be interesting at some point in time to take a look here at 2019, exactly which of those capital projects have already been completed, or to what percentage, and what's been accomplished in that 6-year period. Because things move by rapidly, and people may forget some of the things that have been done.
And we report that regularly to the Senate committee, and then they come back for you all on a quarterly basis. So, but that is definitely something we're looking at.
Director Campuris.
Sarah, can you go back to slide number 9? Not that I want to beat Mr. Blake up, but would you again tell him where we are on our projections, how far we are behind on our amended budget on that slide?
Well, and yeah, so we are 106,000 below the amended budget, which is about $1.5 million to $1,750,000 below the original budget. And really, before when we forecast 2% growth with our 2011 sales tax initiative, prior to the economic downturn, we had been seeing annual growth of in excess of 4%. We thought we were being conservative with 2% estimates. We have seen a lot of volatility. We are now, we're now excited when we see 1.66% growth, but it's critical to restore what has eroded in the way of internet sales tax.
And Gene or Cappy, what can you tell me what the A&P tax has grown this last year?
I think around 2%. Yeah.
So they're still outperforming us.
Right.
Okay. I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, but we
Yeah. Well, and most people do still buy their, go to the restaurant or the hotel is in town, so it is not as impacted as you are well aware. Yeah. The amended. This is after reduced. Yes. Right. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Director Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. Sarah, this may not be a question for you, and Bruce, you may not be able to answer it right now. I'm pretty sure you can't. And Chief Falk is gone, and Chief Finks is not here. But as we celebrate filling 61 police positions, do we have the capability of determining how many of those police officers live in the city of Little Rock, and the number of take-home cars that are connected to that, and the financial impact the take-home cars will have on our budget?
We can. Two answers to that. One, I can assure you the individuals that are just graduating from the academy don't have take-home cars.
Well, we assume a lot of things up here.
Well, but that's a clear fact. I mean, there's only the ones that do have the specialty jobs and so forth. And yeah, we can determine, and I gave you all a report. I do it as the recruit classes is hired. That basically, I think the last one we did was about a 50-50 type of deal, and we'll do that again with the February class.
So we do have the capability of determining the actual number of the 61 positions that we feel that we're celebrating.
We do, and again, one of the things that we've done, and I think has made a tremendous difference, are the incentives that we offer. Once you recruit, you finish the academy, there's an incentive there. Also, if you live outside of Little Rock, there's an incentive to move into the city. So, I believe that's made, and I've heard the chiefs often say that that's been just a game changer as far as recruitment.
But we also have cases where people have utilized that incentive and not going on to be police officers in the city.
I think there were two, Director Richardson, and that has been rectified as far as if that happens. I believe one of them graduated. He was #1 in the class and got accepted to law school, and I think the other one took a job in another city. But we have put in place, and I did inform the board last year, I believe, or it might have even been 2017, that there's a payback procedure if you don't stay for a certain number of years.
Thank you.
Director Hines.
Sarah, one other question. Did we account for the reduction? I know this is something else that's reduced sales tax. Did we account for the reduction when the state reduced taxes on groceries, sales tax on groceries?
That does not impact
That didn't
us.
impact
Their
us, okay.
reduction is only to the state
Okay.
tax.
So we still collect our full
Right.
amount on the groceries. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Director Webb?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a question for Bruce. When people come to Little Rock and go, say, to the Clinton Library or to the museum in Little Rock Central, and then they spend money at restaurants or they stay in a hotel or they go shopping, and now those places are closed, have we heard any anecdotal reports that, restaurants might be hurting a little bit, or from any of our cities that are run, people that you talk to in other cities that have those kinds of tourist attractions, that those businesses are feeling, the businesses that are tourist business are feeling an impact?
I have, and it's hard to gauge what it's going to mean locally or even nationally. And as I talk to my colleagues around the country, I'll give you a good example. I was walking back from the Marriott from a breakfast meeting, and there was a couple from Ireland here, and they just were walking down Markham, and their only goal, the reason they came to Little Rock, was to see the Clinton Presidential Center, and it was closed. So I had to say, well, here's some other things that you might want to do. But it is, as one of my colleagues was talking about the other day, her next door neighbor works for the federal government, and his car's been at the house for the last 3 weeks. So it is going to impact. How we gauge it is tough. As I mentioned, I did visit with the head of the two utilities to ask them to put in something in place to ensure that anybody impacted by the shutdown is not disconnected, and Greg and Tad both agreed to do that. We've also had some conversations with Entergy, and I think they're working on a regional type of approach from their perspective. So I do believe it will be an impact. Now, the only problem, as we talked about earlier, is it's going to be March before we really see the overall impact. And it might be even longer if if it continues.
Thank you.
Director Hines?
If we're done with this agenda item, I have something I'd like to ask.
Any more questions? Well, I definitely want to say thank you to Sarah for your time and attention for the third quarter results. Director Hines?
Thank you. Bruce, looks like you put a copy of a letter that was addressed to the mayor from Central Arkansas Water on proposed adjustments to basic water rate schedule. I think we would appreciate having Mr. Bohannon come give us a presentation on why we're expecting our customers to pay for this new billing service when they're sitting on several $1 million in reserves, and then also an increase in the watershed protection fee. And then there's also another concerning issue, an explanation of the third item, which is a CAW may adjust the volumetric allowance included within the base charge on bills. This seems to me that any reduction in that base charge would have a direct impact on some of our lowest income folks. And in fact, I know it doesn't seem like much, $2.47, but for some in our community, that is a bridge too far, and kind of find it odd that a utility that is continually taking rate increases, and we've only seen our water bills go up since the merger, that they are expecting customers to pay for a new billing service.
Director Hendricks?
Thank you, Mayor. This is for Mr. Moore, and it has to do with an email that I received from you with regard to the trees being cut at the Clinton Library. Would you send me an email where I was instructed that bids would be going out again? There was a problem with this initially, with the trees being cut I was concerned about the way the bid information went out, and it was stopped in 2018. Would you please send me an email?
We'll do that, Director Hendricks, but just for clarification, they're not trees being cut in the Clinton Park, it's along Clinton Avenue, but we'll definitely get that to you.
And I want an email that
Okay.
was sent to me, that bidding was taking place. Because I have a minority that was in the process initially, and then all of a sudden, the process was cut in 2018. And then all of a sudden, we only received one contract. Let me know.
Director Campuris.
Mayor, back in the summer, there was a proposal about that Irma brought up about looking at a change of government, and I made a proposal that we set up some sort of committee to look into this. You and I talked about it. You thought a year was too long, and we said 6 months would be something that you'd live with. But we need to start thinking about how we will form that group and how we look at that. And I'm open to any suggestions. But we said we'd do it, and we wrote it on it, and I'm open to any thoughts on how we look into it.
And Director Campuris, I think we initially said 120 days.
I think it was a little longer, but we'll talk
But
about it.
we can talk about it. Director Richardson.
Yes, Mayor, one point of clarification. Very rarely do I disagree with my good friend Dean, but Irma did not bring up a proposal. Irma brought up a suggestion with respect to putting that before the people. In fact, putting that on the general election ballot, rather than in some cases us spending money to call a special election. So what Irma brought up was a proposal or an opportunity for the citizens to vote on how they want to be governed, which wouldn't have cost us one single dime. So then I think that's what Irma brought for us. I don't think she communicated a position, yay or nay, with respect to that issue. But I think the thing that she was moving forward with, which is why I supported it, was it was a opportunity for the citizens to vote on that particular possibility in our community.
And I stand corrected, and you were correct.
Thank you.
Director Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and not speaking to those points that they just made, but back when we started talking about this, I met with Jay Barth, who has discussed this for a while, looked at the different issues, and he and I had a thought that if we move forward on this, one way to do it, and I'm just going to throw out what we discussed, would be to have the 7 ward directors each point one person, and then after those were appointed, to have the 3 at large and the mayor appoint one person each, but looking to make certain that we were represented well, age-wise, with the makeup that reflected the diversity of our city, racially, and then let those folks who were appointed to it determine, if they want to have 2 meetings or 3 meetings or whatever, but not to spend weeks, whether it's 6 months, 120 days, not to spend so much time debating what this group looked like that we waste time and not get it done. And so that was kind of a simple proposal, but it was a way to hopefully make sure we had good representation from all parts, all people in the city.
Thank you, Director Webb. Vice Mayor Wyatt.
It's a different topic. Is that okay? Are we through with that topic?
I had one other question on that topic, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Yes, Director.
I think Director Webb raised an interesting opportunity. Prior to your election, Mayor, the median age of this board was 68.2. And with respect to the age that you're making reference to, Director Webb, I think that's an interesting point. But the point that has me somewhat flummoxed, Lance, is that we feel like we need to have a process to implement this. So in one sense, we're saying the people are smart enough to choose who's going to govern them, but they're not smart enough to choose how they want to be governed, which has always been real conflictual to me with respect to how we move forward with this, and having some kind of long drawn out process would sometimes may result in a special election, which we know we don't get the same kind of turnout we would get in a general election. So that's why I'm kind of somewhat conflicted that our citizens are smart enough to elect who they want to govern them, but they're not smart enough to determine how they want to be governed. So I always thought that was always an interesting possibility with that point. And I think you make a great point about age representation, 6 to 8.2. That's 6 to 8.2.
Well, thank you so much, Director Richardson. Mr. Manager, could you provide any insight from when the last time we had, was the process with this particular committee? I know there are many different committees that within the mayor would appoint. I know that a lot of that detail wasn't gone into. I think one thing we may want to go into consider an executive session to kind of discuss that as we move forward, so that we can lay out the procedures. This may not be the time or the place to kind of think through all of that thoughts, but I do know there's been precedent that the mayor would kind of set that process in consultation with the board, and if that is so, that would be the preference of the chair to set that process and work with members of the board to get to that.
Good idea.
Well, we could put that in a motion. Mr. Parliamentarian?
You're really not in a meeting, so the motion would be a problem, but Mayor, I think I need to talk to you a little bit further because I'm not sure what you described can be done in executive session.
Thank you. Could it be done right now?
Sorry, I missed that last one.
Could what I just shared be done right now?
If y'all want to sit and talk and say this is how we're going to do it, that could be done.
Or would it be more, I think we could take some time away. What I would like to do is most likely is visit with Directors Campuris, Webb, and Richardson, and then we could try to formalize something to bring back before the board, if that's possible.
I think that could be done. Only because the position of mayor is a different position the way it's being exercised.
Thank you. Director Wright.
My question was, I recall that I remember one and I participated in the other. I think it was Vision Little Rock and Future Little Rock. And as I understand it, doing those two processes, that's how we got to the form of government that we currently have. What was the methodology or process that we implemented to get those two initiatives going? That was, like I said, before my time, but I do recall both of those. So there was like a Vision Little Rock and a Future Little Rock. How do we go about making the decision? Mayor, he's holding up his finger.
Well, I think next is Director Hendricks, who has.
And can somebody answer that question?
But Director Hendricks is next.
I would love for the attorney to answer any of these questions that we're talking about. And I started disagreeing with the attorney that we have to sit here and talk about stuff. You mentioned the executive board. That's what I'm for. Because, you know, I can say some really fresh things, and I wanted to be back there.
The point I was going to make is that when you talk about how we're going to go about the process, that's really not a personnel issue, and executive session is only for personnel issue. When I mentioned that the mayor could talk to Director Campuris or anybody else individually, he can do that, but he can't talk to all three of them at once because that is a meeting. And you couldn't have done that were you not exercising the powers of mayor that you wish to exercise. There has been some difference on that. And Director Wright,
Yes.
Future Little Rock was the first one that came out. The board was interested in a number of areas that it wanted to have addressed. It outlined what those areas were, then made appointments to that group, and then got reports back, and there was a threshold that was placed as to whether a report would lead to an action by the board or by the populace or not. That was repeated in the Vision Little Rock process. Some things were looked at specifically that had been part of Future Little Rock. Other things were brought up, and that's how it was done.
So the board initiated that process.
Yes.
So basically what Director Peck was saying, not Peck, Webb was saying about appointing different people and then opening up forums is...
That, right, they had task forces for the various items, and then that group would meet, and the public was welcome to that, and some of them held hearings and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All righty. Thank you.
So Future Little Rock, excuse me, Mayor, in 93, that process had more to do with passing a public safety tax than it did with how we want to be governed. I mean, I think what resulted in that was a half-cent sales tax that was centered around or geared towards public safety due to the rise in gang involvement and violence. So to me, it seems like that one of those, at least one of those processes, maybe two of those processes were designed less around how we want to be governed, but more how we want to find another avenue to collect more revenue.
Future Little Rock led directly to the ward representation. So that, I know governance was a big part of that in terms of the other issues. I've slept, and I'm closer to the 68.2 than I was.
I can believe that. And I don't expect you to be able to answer this, but I do recall that part of that was centered around and focused on addressing public safety through additional police officers, through preventive intervention and treatment programs, and streetscape repair and infrastructure work. So the intent of it then was centered around how we want to be governed. That was the impetus for that planning process with respect to Future Little Rock. That's what I'm hearing.
Director Capiris.
Well, having lived through Future Little Rock, having lived through Future Little Rock, basically what brought Future Little Rock together was the dramatic defeat of all the proposals in the Diamond Center. The Diamond Center, the Diamond election. It was, I'll tell you all about it. I'll give you the full history of it later. And it was a divisive election where the city was, everybody was mad at each other. And it was a process that went on for 2 or 3 years where a diverse group of citizens came together and looked at Little Rock as a whole and how to make it better. And there were a number of suggestions that came out of it. Ken's right, one of them was public safety. But the other part of it was, because of Les Hollingsworth, the recognition that you had to have PIT money. There was recognition that there was a whole lot of things that came out of it. And if you looked at the group that you started out with, and you looked at the vote at the end, it was unanimous except for one person on everything we moved forward with. We had 2 votes, one passed, one didn't. But it had to do with rental inspection, it had to do with police, it had to do with quality of life, it had to do with a diversity of items that we talked about. It was also a great learning session. Les Hollingsworth taught me more during that session than any person ever has about this city. And that's what it came about. Jane Dickey led that group, and they met for 1.5 years or 2 years. Otis Wilson was the co-chairman of it. They spent a long time looking at governance all over this country. They went to Charlotte. They went to 5 or 6 other places to look. And basically, that's what it was. Vision Little Rock took those proposals and said, how do we make it stronger? And that's where we got the changes that we had. And then there was a legislative change that led to the strong mayor. Is that about right, Tom? So that's the whole process, and I can give you the whole backstory of it. It's a fun story now to listen to. It was a terrible time for this city. It's probably the worst time we've ever lived through in this city in my lifetime.
Thank you, Director Computers. Seeing none, any more? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Director Hendricks.
I'm back to the motion that you attempted to make. Tom, are you saying we cannot go into executive session?
Director Hendricks, right now you can't go into executive session because you're not in a formal meeting. And you would have to give 2 hours notice that you were in a formal meeting before you could meet to go into executive session. So no.
Well, what do we need to do? And,
Well-
and to piggyback upon what Computers was saying, I too am aware of that vision, Little Rock. I have the catalogs and everything, and the basic thing was at-large positions. That started the whole bag of bugs, okay? So I'm just wanting to know, since the mayor mentioned about going into executive session, you're saying we have to adjourn this and go, tell us what to do. Don't skirt the issue. Tell us what we need to do.
Since you're not an official meeting, you would have to get into an official meeting. An official meeting requires 2 hours notice to the news media. After that 2 hours, you could meet and decide to go into executive session if you wish to do so. You can go into executive session at any time you're in an official meeting, which is a regular meeting, but you can only discuss a personnel issue, and a process is not a personnel issue.
So that, Director Hendricks, that being said, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And what I'm going to do is visit with Director Computers, and then we'll present something to the board. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone who attended today for this very interesting and I'm glad we can laugh. Okay, yeah. Interesting Board of Directors meeting where we all are doing what we can to serve our city. Meeting adjourned.